I think the only difference between this Labour government and the Tory government was the Tory government lied to us just as much, but still pretended that they weren't lying. This government has realised, well, what's the point of pretending? They know we're lying, we know we're lying, we're going to continue lying.
Yeah. The Normans introduced the feudal system, in which all of the land belonged to the king, and he gave his land to his trusted servants, and that hierarchy continued all the way down until he became no more than a serf. At least 10 rebellions and revolts between 1066 to the English, culminating in the English Civil War. Okay, so the people are not happy.
It's all short-termism.
Yeah.
The politicians in power today are kicking the can down the road because they don't want to deal with these problems, because it's going to take a lot of backbone and grit to deal with some of these problems. Hi everybody, and welcome back to Nick Talks. My returning guest is David Bisley, who has set a petition up called Change the Oath, and it's on the government website, and it's all about a national conversation about how we're governed and who our politicians and our soldiers and our police officers, who they give their allegiance to. We've already done one episode of this where we go into detail on the petition, so find that one. And then this one today, we're going to talk about how we end up in the mess we're in now, where we have a constitutional monarchy that doesn't seem to be working. We have elected politicians who actively give their allegiance not to the people but to the monarch. Many complications along this. But first of all, David, welcome to the show.
Good to be here again.
And thank you for the first one. I thoroughly enjoyed that, and I learned quite a lot about our system. And you think when you live in the country, born in the country, and I'm 57 years old, you think you'd know everything about your system, but you never do. But you never do. Nobody would argue in this country, I don't think they would, that our system isn't broken. I think we can see it's broken. The people are extremely unhappy. We seem to be getting poorer. Crime's out of control. Mass migration's out of control. We've got to a stage now where not only everyone's always thought that politicians are liars. We've got essays wrote in Rome 2,000 years ago that say exactly the same thing. But we have a Labour government at the moment who only 8 months ago, was telling us what they wouldn't do and what they would do. And 6 months later, they're breaking every promise they ever made and doing things they said they would never do.
Because they think they're immune. That's the issue.
I think they do think that. And to a certain extent, I think they're right in thinking that. Because I think the only difference between this Labour government and the Tory government was the Tory government lied to us just as much, but still pretended that they weren't lying. This government has realised, well, what's the point of pretending? They know we're lying, we know we're lying, we're going to continue lying. So why am I wasting my time pretending I'm not lying?
That's such a good analogy.
If anything, I think they're treating us a little bit better by not lying to our faces that they're not lying.
Sure.
Like all problems, these things don't happen overnight. So we didn't live in a perfect system 10 years ago, 100 years ago, and suddenly people blame Tony Blair broke this system. I don't have that. Things take a long time to break if they were ever working in the first place. Was our system ever really working for the people? What's the history behind that?
My statement is that our system of governance has never worked for the people. Never. And it's never been about the people.
Oh, no.
It's always been about people in positions of power. And yet we've created this myth that somehow our system of government is about the people. Okay. Just a little comment about what you just said about Labour. I totally agree with that statement. In fact, if anything, we can be thankful for what the Labour Party is doing right now, because they are at least opening up people's eyes to the bankruptcy of socialism. And not only the bankruptcy of socialism, but also, which, I think Keir Starmer is a neo-Marxist. That's my position. But also just the bankruptcy of the system, as you just said. The Conservatives are just the other side of the coin. So if anything, yes, thank you, Keir Starmer, for showing yourself as a tyrant and that we live under a tyrannical rule. So for me, it goes all the way back to 1066.
Right.
And, the Normans came over in 1066, won the Battle of Hastings, some conflicts after that. But let's just talk a little bit previously to 1066, what existed there before. The people, the indigenous people before the Normans came over, were just in the throes of forming a society in which they recognize themselves as English, and in which they were actually content with their lot in life. They were content with their landmass. And so you had these Anglo-Saxons in the south. Then you had a mix of Anglo-Saxons and Danes as you went further north. You have the Celts in Cornwall, you had the Celts in Wales, you had the Celts in Scotland. And so the Englishness was very much the Anglo-Saxon in England into the Danelaw area of Yorkshire and beyond. And so that was defined as England. Okay. And so, but there was very much a period in history in which that group was beginning to identify themselves as English. Okay. It was still in formation. But the thing about them that I find interesting is that, yes, there were border clashes between, you know, the Scots in the north and the Anglo-Saxon Danes in the south. But actually, these people groups were quite happy with their allotted spaces. You know, there was no desire for the Anglo-Saxons to invade Scotland, for instance. They were content with their lot in life. And then came the Normans. And the Normans won the Battle of Hastings. You know, Harold, bless his heart, made a strategic mistake, in my opinion. He should have withdrawn and gathered more forces. He'd already fought a war up north, battle up north. And he had to rush down to Hastings to fight this war. So, you know, he made a tactical mistake, but the Normans won it. Okay. Now, when the Normans won that battle, you know, we can have the conversation that William felt that he was entitled to the throne, etc., through Edward the Confessor. The Normans then embarked on a system of repression. They committed massacres of the Anglo-Saxon Celtic community in the south, and they committed what can really only be considered in modern times as a genocide, the harrying of the north, of the Anglo-Saxon and Dane community in the north. And so from that period in time, the Normans really suppressed the English nest that was developing at that point in time. The English average Joe became a second-class citizen. There were different punishments for if you had Norman blood as regard to English blood. All of a sudden, the English were dispossessed of their land, and the Normans introduced the feudal system, in which all of the land belonged to the king, and you know he gave his land to his trusted servants, and that hierarchy continued all the way down until he became no more than a serf and a slave. So in the Norman system, which introduced the feudal system, the vast majority of the English population was reduced basically to just one rung above slavery, basically. Not only that, but the English language was removed from the law and from commerce, so that Latin French, the Norman Latin French, was used. And so here's an Englishman. This is how, and this is almost ironic for today's world, right? Here's an Englishman in 1066, the years after. He has to go to court. He needs a translator to understand what's happening in a normal court, because it's all in Latin or French, not in the English vernacular. And it took up until the end of the 15th century for that French law to be replaced by the English vernacular in the law courts. And it wasn't actually until 1731, until actually there was a legal ban on using French, law French, in law courts, and it had to be in an understandable language to everybody, the English vernacular.
And there's a reason for that, and that's because if you can control who has access to the law, then that makes you a powerful person.
Exactly.
So if the average person doesn't understand anything, it's a different language, then they've got to come to you and rely on you. And it's power.
It is power. That's what it's all about. And so, you know, you're an Englishman in a court and you're having to translate her. I mean, that's how ridiculous is that? It's your land, right? So this is what happened. Now, obviously, over 200, 300 years, 400 years, both people groups intermingled and intermarried. And so we have a development of an Anglo-Norman culture, okay? And we can say, well, that became a rich tapestry. But actually, only in a certain segment of society, because actually the Anglo-Saxon Celtic Dane bloodline was still the main bloodline of the majority of the indigenous population of the lands. So we have here then a system that has come over from the continent, the Normans. They have repressed Englishness, They made the English second-class citizens, imposed their own law, their own terms, dispossessed them of their land. And by force of power, the English have to now coexist with that system. Okay. And so we have this now graduation of a relationship where now the king, as the head of the feudal system, he has the divine right of kings. He can do as he pleases. But we know that from 1688, or from 1066 to 1688, that period of where the monarch, we could say, was, well, up until the English Civil War, when the monarch had the divine right of kings, we know there is friction there, because there's at least 10 rebellions and revolts between 1066 to the English, culminating in the English Civil War. Okay, so the people are not happy. So this fracture that we're seeing now has been repeated throughout history, starting with the Peasants' Revolt and different revolts and rebellions, again, and all against the king, all against the crown. Okay, and so people are recognizing it's not a fair system. We want rid of this system, or we want a recalibration of this system. So this cry for a recalibration or remodel is nothing new. So then we get to the English Civil War, 1642 to 51. In which Charles I is deposed. Eventually he's beheaded. And then we have the Protectorate under Cromwell. Yep. And then, as you say, he dies, his son's not up to the job, and so they bring Charles II back on the throne. Yep. Now, we're told that was what the people wanted. Well, I would say, I'd query that and say, well, was it?
Which people?
Which people? The victors write history, okay? Yeah. So if you're the legal scribes and you're writing history as an educated from Norman bloodline or Plantagenet line, you're going to write it in your favor, right? So, we're told that the people wanted Charles II back on the throne. And then we had the Glorious Revolution, okay? And then after that, we had the Bill of Rights, 1688. And bloodless revolution. But then we say, well, if that was the Bill of Rights was great. Well, for its time, fine. But for me, it missed an opportunity, which was to completely remodel society away from the monarch. But instead of doing that, we kept the monarch as the head of state and then try and make a parliamentary system fit in it. So for the last 300 years, what we've had in a sense from a phrase from the Bible, from the New Testament, is we've had the principle of trying to pour new wine into old wineskins. The old wineskins being a monarchical system that doesn't work, that is abusive and unfair, and that throughout the world it's discarded wherever there's opportunity to. And also, the king, monarchs never give up power unless they're either told to or made to. Okay? That's the history of monarchs. And so we have that whole history.
That's the history of mankind.
Well, exactly. So we have this whole period from 1066 to 1688 where the people, and even some of the barons, etc., are removing power from the monarch consistently, starting with the Magna Carta, right? Yeah. Consistently removing power, not giving him power. And then we get to 1688, in which we say, okay, well, we're going to leave you as the head of state. It's going to be a Commonwealth system, but it's still going to be your government, and we're going to build on that system that we have freedom of speech. The Bill of Rights says the principle of freedom of speech, but whose freedom of speech again? The Bill of Rights is only really talking about the principle of parliamentarians having freedom of speech as regards to the monarch. And they're not talking about freedom of speech for you and me, okay? It's, again, a power brokerage. Yeah. And so for me, since 1688, the last 300 years, there has been a pseudo-democracy. And it has worked, but the only reason I believe it has worked is not because of the system of governance itself, which I think is broken and unfair. It's the same system of governance that gave us a whole set of territorial and resource wars that created imperialism. And I know that's another bigger question, okay, and a bigger issue. But it's a system that gave us conflicts based on resource and territorial gain, not based on an existential threat, okay? It's a system that gave us workhouses. It's a system that gave us debt prisons. It's a system that sent adolescents across to Australia for minor crimes. It was a system in which those who were poor were living in third world poverty, what we would consider third world poverty today. And those who had the means were living like Chatsworth House. Okay. And so, I've just been to Chatsworth House just yesterday, and I was walking around there. My emotions were mixed because I'm looking at all this grandeur and excellence. And there's one aspect of it which you're thinking to yourself, yeah, but this whole estate would have been creating work for craftsmen and builders and gardeners and villagers, etc. It would have had its own economy. But actually, it's also on the other side a monument to an unfair society and the haves and the have-nots. And, I know every society's had to struggle with that to a certain degree. But so all I'm saying is that for the last 300 years, it's not all been bells and roses. It's also been an unfair system. And because the victors have...
Let me just push back there for one moment. So you're right, it's always been an unfair system, only when you compare it to utopia. If you compare it to the same time in Russia, the same time in Poland, the same time in, Aztec America, things were worse there. So it all depends on what you're comparing it to.
Sure.
Yeah.
And all systems of government are going to be imperfect.
Yes.
And I think we had this conversation before that, you're never going to reach a utopia. And if your goal is utopia, well then, get on the next trip to Mars, because it's never going to happen.
Yeah.
But we have to try and formulate a government and a society which is fair to the best of our ability.
Yeah.
And because our knowledge and our experience of governance and history evolves over time, and we can look back in history and say that worked and that didn't work, we are at the privilege of saying at this point in history, well, now it's a time to recalibrate and remodel and to take the best of what was the past and keep it, and take what didn't work and what is still not working and reject it and throw it out.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we are. So, for the last 300 years, I would say that we've had a system of governance that the only reason it has worked is not been because of our system of constitutional monarchy. The only reason it has worked, is because for that period of time, we have been a strong Christian ethos nation. And it's been our identity in that ethos that has been the glue for our society. It has not been the monarch. He's not been the glue. It's not been our parliamentary system. That has not been the glue. Not even common law has been the glue, although common law, that judicial system, is probably, amongst the best in the world. But even that has not been the glue. I would say that the glue for our society has been this single issue, has been, as a nation, up until recent times, we've identified ourselves as a Christian ethos nation. And because of that, and because of the teachings of the New Testament, we've been taught tolerance. We've been taught fairness. We've also been taught that you don't kick against authority, that you respect authority, okay? And this has been very much a top-heavy form of British Christianity that has been taught by the bishops and the Church of England, who of course are part of the House of Lords, etc. That is, Christians don't stir things up. Christians don't kick against the go, you don't rock the boat. You accept your lot in life. This is a very British form of Christianity, and that you accept higher authorities that are over you. And it's only because of that ethos in our society that this system has maintained up to this present time. And it's not been without its fractures, because if we were to look at the end of the 18th century, the beginning of the 19th century, this nation would have almost gone the same way as the French Revolution, because there is deep discontent in this nation about the monarchy and the parliamentary system. And that was not long after the Bill of Rights, right? So there was deep discontent, and there was an underlying feeling that the same thing was happening. The crown wasn't serving us, the parliamentary system wasn't serving us, and so we needed a violent revolution. The only thing that kept that in check was our Christian ethos. That's the only thing. And so I would say that that's the glue that has kept our nation together. It wouldn't have mattered whether we were a Republican system or whatever, this and that or the other. The thing that's kept us together is that glue as a Christian ethos nation. Now we are a post-Christian society. We have to accept that. So now that glue has gone. It's gone. And I don't think it's going to come back, realistically. So now it's a case of saying, okay, if we are in a post-Christian society, that glue has gone, that identified us as a Christian ethos nation. We need to seriously recalibrate now, because if we don't, the future without that glue is going to be chaos, and I think, violent anarchy.
Oh yeah, I've been talking about this now for about a month. I interviewed a gentleman, a professor at King's College London, called David Betts, Professor of War, and he's predicting a English civil war in the next 5 years. Not the way we imagine a civil war, this army and that army. He's talking about guerrilla warfare. He's talking about assassinations, kidnappings, killings, bombs going off. He's more talking about Northern Ireland troubles than Roundheads and Cavaliers attacking each other. And that's because of the splitting of society.
The splitting of ideologies as well.
Yeah.
There are different ideologies in our nation now that do not respect democracy. And because of that, it's going to create a clash. It's just a logical conclusion. Yeah. And because we're not a Christian nation anymore, we're a post-Christian ethos nation. There are now ideologies within our nation that are undermining not only our history, the fabric of it, but are undermining the actual essence of what it means to live in a democratic society. There are ideologies in our nation that don't believe in democracy. And yet our parliamentary system is giving them space to breathe and to flourish.
Yeah.
So that's only going to end in tears.
We were successful. I'm not sure if it's because we're a Christian country. I think it was more likely because we were an island nation.
That's partly geography.
And we had geography, strong borders. Apart from one or two invasions, it was the same people, and we developed that mentality that peace and getting along and trade was the way to success, not invading each other all the time. So that developed, but we don't have that anymore now. We now have open borders. We now have people living here with completely different values to us. It's not that they're different to us. They're completely different to us. And we've developed a mindset here of being tolerant, but we're also tolerant of the intolerant.
It's a naivety, which I think, for me, it's a naivety that we have equated kindness with letting anybody do what they want to do, or any ideology can come into our country. It's also, I think, an idea which I think is a neo-Marxist idea, which is that all ideologies are equal. Therefore, if all ideologies are equal, all ideologies are welcome. Well, history will tell you that all ideologies are not equal. The history of our modern world, our recent history, will tell you that all ideologies are not equal. Some ideologies are better than others. Okay, so if you have this kind of university, I'm sat on the toilet reading Marx or some other left-wing publication, it tells you, we're all equal and all ideologies are equal. You're then going to take that into society. It doesn't work, but you're going to take it into society, and you're going to force society to accept the myth that it's not about ideologies. Of course it's about ideologies, because ideologies is a worldview. And if your worldview will determine how you treat your common man, it will determine how you form a society. So yes, of course it's about ideologies. And that's why we should have been on our guard about inviting certain ideologies into our nation that have no regard for the rule of law and also have no regard for the principles of democracy. But in our naivety, and because I think of this erroneous understanding of the New Testament and the scriptures, which is everybody's got to be nice and kind to each other and, always turn the other cheek, from a Christian ethos, which I think is totally taken those scriptures out of context, that we've become a naive people.
We've become a naive people because since the Second World War, we have no idea what it's like to be in trouble.
That's true.
So now we think peace is the natural state of humans. And it's only when humans' evilness comes to the fore that we have wars. Well, it's the other way around. War and fighting and tribal fight is the status quo. That's the history of mankind. It's only once you gain more than that through Christianity, through being an island nation, that you can develop something better. When you talk about ideology, then under that term ideology, do you also mean culture?
Yes, definitely.
So for me, people say all cultures are equally valuable. What a load of rubbish. So the way to dispel that straight away is, do you think female genital mutilation is wrong? And the answer is, of course it is. I've not met anyone who disagrees with that. So therefore, you can judge cultures on their practices based on your own morality. So you can create a list, the best to the worst. The second you do that,
Use your noggin.
means cultures are not equal. It means you can then, based on your own morality, judge cultures, and we judge cultures all the time. So this idea that all cultures are welcome and all cultures contribute, and I'm tired of politicians saying things like, this group of people in the country have contributed amazingly to the country. They never tell you how they contributed. And when you ask them and drill into people about what they meant was, they paid taxes. Well, paying taxes is the bare minimum of what you do in the country. That doesn't make you a good citizen when you pay your taxes. And being told they contribute is just one of those copes. It's one of those myths that people who've come here have helped build the UK and helped build England. They haven't.
The NHS is an example of that, right?
Yes.
So the Labour Party tells us and the Conservative Party tells us that we need more immigrants coming to the country to service the NHS. Well, that's circular reasoning, because the only reason why the NHS is on borrowed time is because of the ballooned explosion of people that have come into our country and have put further demands on the NHS. And that's why the indigenous population seems to be always at the back of the queue. So the circular reason is we need people to come into our country to service the NHS, which has basically been ballooned by an immigrant community. So the whole thing is nonsense. It's fast.
Yeah. And when you say to British-born people, there's jobs here for you, well, I can't live on those wages. Why can't I live on those wages? Because of mass immigration keeps wages down. So then we import more people in, so keep those wages down even further.
Sure.
And it's this, for me, it's a Ponzi scheme.
Sure. Oh, well, I use the same phrase, actually.
It's a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah.
It's all short-termism.
Yeah.
The politicians in power today are kicking the can down the road because they don't want to deal with these problems, because it's going to take a lot of backbone and grit to deal with some of these problems. And they're going, I'm not up for this fight. Kick it down the road a bit. Someone else will deal with that 10 years from now.
Yeah, it's exactly the problem. Our politicians are short-termists. That's the problem. And they're always lining their own pockets. I mean, that's just blatantly obvious. The thing about the British people is the British people are not racist. The indigenous population of this nation, there might be a few bad apples in the barrel, but as a people, we are not racist. We don't see skin color. Other nations may have that issue, but we don't. But what we do see is ideologies. And so we don't differentiate between races or color, but we do, as a people, differentiate about ideologies. And that's the core issue that many of us are looking at and saying, well, actually, I don't care whether you are brown, red, black, whatever. It's your ideology that I'm concerned with. And so that's the core issue. And that's why, our parliamentary system is not dealing with it, because they say all ideologies are equal, when they're plainly not.
I think I can simplify that a lot better than that. I think the British people are looking at that going, this isn't fair. So why is it fair that you can come to my country and demand this, demand that? Why is it fair that you can come to my country, then sexually abuse or rape our women? Why is it fair? So I don't think they look at ideology as in that way. I think they're looking at going, this goes against fairness. And the English and the British have always been, for many centuries now, a fair people.
That's why people come here, right?
Yes.
So people come here because they respect that cricket rule, the English game. We want fairness across society.
I don't think they come here because they respect that. I think they come here because they know there's free stuff on offer.
It's an opportunity, and
they know it's better than where they were born.
Sure. There is an element, though, of individuals that are coming into our countries. I don't have a problem with immigration, okay, as long as it's controlled, as long as it's sensible immigration.
I got to a stage where I want zero immigration.
Okay, fine. And I think there is a point in time where and that's actually one of my points, where we're going to have to completely close our borders, COVID style, and recalibrate and work out who's in the country and get rid of. I think there's a point in time when we do literally have to have a complete moratorium and say no more and figure out, okay, you're out. But in principle, I don't have a problem with immigration people coming into this country. But I do have a problem with people who are coming into this country with an agenda.
Yeah.
And that agenda is not only anti-British, it is anti-democracy. They're coming into our country with an agenda to usurp our society. And that is an added form of tension that is coming to our society. So it is about fairness. But there's also this insidious side, right? This sedition that's going on in our society, where people are entering in our nation with an agenda to topple us, to usurp us, to remove our system of rule of law from the landscape. And that, for me, is the greater danger.
I agree with that. I don't think it's and you didn't say this, but I don't think it's a concerted effort, as in a plan, as in James Bond villain stroking a cat going, we're going to do this. To me, it comes down to the story of the frog and the scorpion. If we're importing scorpions, we cannot be surprised when scorpions act like scorpions.
Sure.
That's what they're bred to do. That's how the scorpions acted in their country. And we're looking at, and what we should have done and what we need to do is stop importing scorpions.
I agree. However, I would actually give it a little bit more specific detail and say those scorpions have an agenda. It's not just because that's what they've been bred to do. They actually have an agenda to usurp our society, and that is how I would give an additional definition to that scorpion.
No, David, in the next episode we'll get into who those people are. But for now, thank you so much for coming along, and
Yeah, real
let's do another one very soon.
Please.